tonight.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump. But we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way.
The president's Justice Department takes aim at James Comey. Plus, as Israel's war against Hamas continues in Gaza.
Ladies and gentlemen, we must remain vigilant. We must remain absolutely clear-minded and vigilant.
The new message the Israeli Prime Minister has regarding Iran. And the future of free speech in America. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A high-profile indictment as President Trump turns up the heat on his political foes. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, former FBI Director James Comey is facing federal charges, accused of lying to Congress and obstructing justice. The indictment centers on his 2020 testimony about the FBI's investigation into alleged collusion between President Trump and Russia. Prosecutors say Comey knowingly gave false statements and tried to interfere with an internal review. Comey says he did nothing wrong and he's ready to fight the charges in court. All right, for more, let's bring in our political panel tonight. CBN News senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright and David Brody, CBN News chief political analyst. Gentlemen, welcome. So Kelly, critics are calling this a political prosecution. What is the White House saying about James Comey's indictment?
Well, let's talk about what the president himself is saying about this indictment. He calls it justice in America. And if you just read some of the messages that he's posted on social media, as well as what he's has told reporters this morning, he says it's about justice, not about revenge. He goes on to say justice in America and decried James Comey as, quote, a dirty cop. Look, the president has made it very clear there's no love lost here. He has always had as he stated, a problem with James Comey, the former FBI director under President Trump's term as the 45th president of the United States. It's historically known that he fired him. He's always been upset with him and wants a chance to bring him to justice, as he says. Of course, a lot of people are watching this, and critics are saying that this is weaponizing the Justice Department because it happened in response to the president calling upon the Justice Department to look into James Comey again, stating that he should not get away with lying and obstruction of justice. So here we are, and many people are watching this very closely, and to some, it comes as no surprise.
Yeah. David, what do you make of it all?
Well, a couple of things. What other evidence does the DOJ have exactly? Because right now it feels dicey, big time. Remember, there's a lot of that videos going around of Senator Ted Cruz talking to James Comey about him potentially lying under oath. But let's remember that what we understand is that Andrew McCabe, to my understanding, and I've looked at this now for a while, never said that Comey authorized it. I mean, it was Andrew McCabe who authorized the leak and then told Comey in the day or two afterwards. That's key. That would suggest that Comey wasn't lying when he said that he didn't authorize it. So, look, maybe the White House, excuse me, I say the White House, the DOJ has more on this. We'll see. But at this point, the evidence seems a little bit sketchy here for sure. And that's not going to, it might make MAGA happy right now that he's been indicted, but we'll see what happens if it ever comes to fruition.
Yeah. Let's shift gears here a little bit. We are on the verge of a government shutdown. Lawmakers, they need to reach a deal by Wednesday. But Kelly, it sounds like there's really not a lot of appetite for that. The White House says it has no plans as of right now to negotiate with Democrats. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, you know, Jenna, you and I discussed this earlier this week, just about a day before when the president had stated that he canceled a meeting with key Democrat leaders, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat leader on the House side, and then Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader. And he stated that he wasn't holding the meeting to make a deal with them because of the fact that he felt that they were not coming to him with a real honest assessment of what's going on in the economy. and becoming honest brokers for the American people. Also, Senate Majority Leader John Thune had stated that he had advised the president in terms of what to do if he should have that meeting to avert the government shutdown. And Senator Thune had expressed a distrust for what the Democrat leaders were trying to do, and that is raise more money to the tune of $1 trillion+ to actually deal with the healthcare issues that Democrats claim will be lost because of the big, beautiful bill. So again, here we are on the precipice of a government shutdown, and it does not look like cooler heads at this time will prevail to bring all sides together, and the president actually stepping in to actually make things happen to avert a government shutdown and find a way to have some common ground.
Yeah, you know, David, it feels like we're in this situation so often. Do you think this resolves, or where do you see this going?
No, I don't think it resolves at all. I definitely think it's going to be a shutdown, and here's why. Chuck Schumer needs there to be a shutdown specifically because he just got absolutely ridiculed by the far left when he agreed to the continuing resolution back in March. And remember, he'll be running for Senate. AOC is kind of smiling in the background. The last thing Chuck Schumer needs right now is to, in essence, the way the left would see it, capitulate to President Trump yet a second time around. So there's no way Chuck Schumer is going to agree to anything right now, at least. I think this is a shutdown that goes a couple of weeks, and then we take it from there.
Yeah,
my colleague and friend David is very right, because Chuck Schumer has nowhere to go, and the leadership is appalling to many Democrats because there is no leadership there. They're caving to the progressive far left, and it's not doing them any good.
Yeah. I want to ask you guys finally about former Vice President Kamala Harris. She is on a media blitz promoting her new book, 107 Days. It's essentially her retelling of the 2024 election, and it is getting a good amount of criticism from her own fellow Democrats. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro among them. He essentially said she still needs to answer for why she didn't speak up about Joe Biden's cognitive decline. David, to you first, your thoughts on this memoir and the reaction we're seeing to it?
I'll be quick. It reminds me of the Talking Heads song, Burning Down the House. That's pretty much what she's doing. And it also suggests to me that she's not running for public office anytime soon at this point, because when you torch the party like that, you're in trouble.
All right, Kelly, final word?
I'll be quick as well. 107 Days is the name of it, and it's really about 107 ways to leave your party.
Wow. All right. Gentlemen, always good to see you on a Friday. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. And coming up, Israeli Prime Minister, he's facing the United Nations head-on as support grows for a Palestinian state. This and other top international headlines next on Faith Nation. Reading the names of each living hostage, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reaffirmed his commitment to defeating Hamas in a fiery speech to the UN General Assembly. Pushing back on accusations Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza and rebuking the growing recognition of a Palestinian state, he used the speech to remind fellow members of the atrocities of October 7th.
Hamas carried out the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. They slaughtered 1,200 innocent people, including over 40 Americans and foreign nationals from dozens of countries represented here. They beheaded men. They raped women. They burnt babies alive. They burnt babies alive in front of their parents. What monsters. Here's another message to those Western leaders. Israel will not allow you to shove a terrorist state down our throats. We will not commit national suicide because you don't have the guts to face down a hostile media and anti-Semitic mobs demanding Israel's blood.
And the speech was broadcasted via cell phones and loudspeakers into Gaza. Dozens of UN delegates exited the address in protest. And for more on this and other top international headlines, we are joined by CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas. George, thanks for being here. So, with the growing movement to recognize a Palestinian state and the walkout we saw at the UN, how concerned is Israel about standing alone in the international arena?
Well, based on Benjamin Netanyahu's speech today at the UN General Assembly, not a whole lot. I mean, from saying to the rest of the world that he's not going to allow anybody to shove a terror state down their throats, to basically saying that the world leaders, the Western leaders, buckled under pressure. And he says, quote, "I guarantee you one thing, Israel will not." He basically went on to lay out, a sense of what has happened since October 7th, nearly 2 years ago. Pretty much the entire Middle East redrawn, reshaped. He said what has happened, the potential of peace with Syria and Lebanon gives them an opportunity for, quote, a dramatic expansion of the Abraham Accords. He talked about Iran and what Israel, along with the United States, have been able to accomplish in the last 2 years, basically saying that Israel's victory over the Iranian terror axis have opened up possibilities for peace that were unthinkable 2 years ago. And he had a direct message also for the Iranian regime. He said to the Iranian people, it's time to make, quote, Iran great again. Hopefully that, in essence, saying that hopefully in the future down the road that Israel and Iran can have a relationship, a political, economic relationship that they used to have once before. Again, it doesn't matter if 100 diplomats representing some 50 countries walked out of the hall right before his speech. As you said, he was fiery, he was compassionate, as well as very, very straightforward in terms of what Israel faces in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, powerful for sure. President Trump, he says negotiators, George, they're actually close to a deal to end the war in Gaza, and Arab leaders are backing the plan. What can you tell us about that, and how realistic is something like this? Who would actually govern Gaza, that kind of thing?
Yeah, excellent question. So my understanding from Steve Witkoff, the president's Middle East envoy, meeting with the various Gulf countries on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. The president met with folks from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, and Pakistan. And what they're calling this is the Trump 21-point plan. There is no specifics to outline necessarily, but the interesting reporting, Jenna, from the BBC, in essence, that they would call on former British Prime Minister Tony Blair to head up what's called a Gaza International Transitional Authority. In essence, that Tony Blair, after things quelled on the Gaza Strip, that Tony Blair, along with this transitional government, would rule the Gaza Strip for about a 5-year time period with assistance from the United States, from the European Union, as well as the Gulf countries. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The White House is saying that that's going to happen probably in the next couple of days. We'll see if the Israelis agree to it, and more importantly, whether Hamas would agree to it.
Yeah, the world is holding its breath. That's for sure. Shifting gears, George, Turkey's president was at the White House for the first time in years. What stood out to you about that visit, and how do you think it could shift the dynamics in the region?
Well, you know, based on Volodymyr Zelensky's meeting at the Oval Office a couple of months ago, you know, when there were fireworks, you never know what's going to happen when a foreign head of state walks into the Oval Office. But those who've been watching U.S.-Turkey relations over the last 6-7 years, they're actually coming away from this meeting and saying that this was actually pretty good. In essence, Turkey has been under sanctions by this administration as well as the Biden administration going back to about 2020, when actually the Trump administration levied sanctions on Turkey because the Turks decided to go to the Russians and buy this so-called S-400 missile defense system, and the Americans didn't quite like it. So Erdogan came back to the White House this time. They were cordial. Trump was singing his praises, although talking to my friends in Istanbul, they know what kind of a leader Erdogan has been in terms of human rights, the political crackdown he has carried out on the country and the opposition leaders. But in essence, Turkey wanted the United States to lift sanctions and the possibility of purchasing much-needed F-35 fighter jets from the United States. President Trump hinted that, if Turkey decides not to keep guzzling oil from Russia, which is basically funding the war machine in Ukraine, that if the Turks don't buy any more Russian oil, that the United States will consider lifting sanctions and potentially selling F-35s to the Turks. So it was a quite good bilateral meeting between these two leaders.
Yeah, George, on the war in Ukraine, President Trump, he stunned the world this week when he said that he thinks Ukraine can actually win back all of its territory from Russia. What do you think is behind this shift in attitude from the White House, George, and how is it being received by Kyiv?
Well, let me answer the last question. Talking to my sources in Kyiv just in the last 24, 48 hours, they're not holding their breath. They think that Donald Trump will change his mind in the next 10 minutes. Having said that, this is the first time in the last 8 months that the president has said anything remotely close to what he said in his tweet, basically that Ukraine can potentially win back all of its land that it lost to the Russians. I think it really signals that the Trump administration is absolutely frustrated with Vladimir Putin after the meeting in Alaska. The intensity, the ferociousness, the attacks, the missile attacks, the drone attacks by the Russians carried on the Ukrainians has just intensified. And so there is this growing frustration. Again, Trump has been scolding Zelensky for the last 8 months. Yesterday, he basically praised him, called him a brave man, and basically said that the Ukrainians have taken a hell of a fight to the Russians. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the days ahead. Yeah,
quite a change from that Oval Office meeting we saw several months ago. Senior international correspondent George Thomas. George, thank you. And up next, feeling divided? Well, you're not alone. A new poll shows most Americans see a political crisis. What's fueling the fear and how we can unite again after this. Welcome back. A new national poll is painting a grim picture of how Americans are feeling right now. According to Quinnipiac University, most people believe the country is stuck in a political crisis and confidence in free speech is starting to fade. 79% say the U.S. is in a political crisis. 53% are worried that free speech is not being protected. And when it comes to political violence, 71% say it's a very serious problem, with more than half believing it will only get worse. And here now is former Minnesota Congresswoman and Dean of Regent University's Robertson School of Government, Michelle Bachmann. Congresswoman, welcome. Wonderful to have you with us this evening. So nearly 8 in 10 Americans agree the U.S. is in a political crisis. I'd just like to start by getting your reaction to these numbers.
Well, thank you for having me on this evening. The poll rings absolutely true. The world just saw a young, vibrant man who loves God and who loves free speech assassinated in cold blood on live TV. That shook up not only America, it shook up the world. People were shocked to see that some unhinged lunatic from the left would actually take the life of an individual who's trying to promote free speech rights on college campuses, of all places. And so this is a huge problem, and it makes sense that people are very nervous. They're shocked, they're stunned at what they saw. But here's the problem. We also know that just this week, the head of Google admitted that they had pressure from the Democrat Biden administration to suppress speech, political speech, free speech. And so the federal government, the US government under the Biden administration, pressured both Google, Facebook, Twitter, before they became X, to shut down people's speech. That happened from 2020, but it also happened during the COVID years. This is shocking. We hadn't seen this before. And these big companies, the big tech companies, should be punished for doing this, because we all know the First Amendment says that the federal government has no power to censor speech. But the federal government doesn't have the power to collude with big big tech to shut down our speech either. So this is a tremendous problem. And now we're seeing the outbreak of political violence.
Yeah.
In particular, we're seeing that on the part of the left side of the political spectrum. And so people are nervous about this, and we've got to address this. And so we have to have a complete denunciation of violence. But there's a huge cohort of people now who think it's acceptable to use violence against people they disagree with on speech. We've never seen this before.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally wrong. It's a crime. And so we have to have intervention.
Yeah, that struck me in the poll. Only 71% see political violence as a serious problem. You know, we just have about a minute left, Congresswoman, but how do we right this ship? How do we turn things around?
Well, it's clear to me that God gave us speech and he gave us our nation. And so as we're seeing people now in a time of revival turning back to God, we've got to turn to him. We have to turn to the Bible. And we have a great founding document in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. And as long as we stand on that biblical mission statement of our nation and then work through our political process as the Constitution states, we'll be fine. But again, we have to have self-control as a people and respect one another's viewpoints, no matter which side we're on.
Yeah. All right. Former Minnesota Congresswoman and Dean of Regent University's Robertson School of Government, Michelle Bachmann, thank you very much. And still ahead, restoring Appalachia to its former musical glory. Next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, a group of musicians is bringing the sound of music back to Appalachia. As we approach the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Helene's devastating effect across southeastern United States, efforts to restore families and communities are still going strong. Musician Nicholas Williams started a project called Restring Appalachia, collecting donated items like banjos, mandolins, and guitars for folks who lost theirs in what Nicholas calls the epicenter of bluegrass and old-time music. So far, he's collected more than 1,000 instruments to give to victims of Hurricane Helene.
It's hard to really fathom, and it is just such a huge honor to be any kind of part of that rebuilding process for us.
And the nonprofit is also donating instruments to victims of Hurricane Milton, the LA wildfires, and the floods in Texas. And that is going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening and weekend.